Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode at World's Edge, the Warhammer Fantasy Lore Show. We received a request to talk about the Elves of Laurelorn Forest, and thank you for that. So we're going to go ahead and do that today. Please remember that if you'd like to talk about anything in particular, if you'd like me to do some research into a subject, please leave it in the comments or send me a direct message through my Facebook, and I'll be more than happy to look into that subject for you. This was a real pleasure. I actually didn't know much about them myself, and they are a fascinating subject. Without further ado, let's talk about the Elves of Laurelorn Forest, or the Eonir. So there is some fundamental differences between the Elves of Laurelorn Forest, and the Eonir versus the Asrai, which are of course the Elves of Laurelorn. The Wood Elves were most famous with dealing with, and of course the Asur, which are the High Elves, and the Drukai, which are the Dark Elves of Naggaroth. But let's go ahead and start off with where are they. So Laurelorn, as we know, is in Bretonnia. Laurelorn Forest is or could be more accurately described as the Wood Elves that live in the Empire. So the background image that I have here is of Nordland. So that's the province that is directly above the Reichland. It borders Marienburg, Middenland, and Ostland, and directly above them is the Sea of Claws. So if you're looking at the map of the Old World that we were so beautifully given by Games Workshop recently, you're going to be seeing that the see the Sea of Claws is right here. Laurelorn Forest is here. And you'll notice that they actually did make sure to include the glyph or the political banner of Laurelorn Forest both here and also here. And we know from the lore that the Elves of Laurelorn Forest, the Eonir, do have representation both near Reichland, so both near Altdorf and also near both near their home, near Tor Lithanel, which is their capital city, and that's the one that's located up at the top here. So it'll be interesting to see if all of these are supposed to be just Wood Elves, or if they're supposed to be representing specifically Eonir, because this actually looks like Laurelorn, where it is located here, and this of course is a whole nother community of elves. We do know there are exiled elves throughout the Old World. Warhammer Total War puts elves over here, for example, as well as in other parts of the world, such as down here with the exiles of Orion, for example. But yeah, so the Old World seems to be putting elves in closer down towards Estalia and Tilia, as well as in the forest of Laurelorn, which is going to be in this area here. The capital city of them is of the Eonir, as mentioned, is Tor Lithanel, and it is located up in Nordland. The Eonir and the Elves of Laurelorn were founded actually well before the Asrai of Laurelorn, before the War of the Beard, in fact. This map from the War of the Beard places them right over here. And during that conflict, they were besieged several times later on in the conflict, until their army was actually destroyed. Shortly after the destruction of Athelmaya and also Sith-Ryanek, both of those cities were far more populous. And it was actually the army of Carrack Eight Peaks, which was on the way to destroy Tor Lithanel, when it was set upon by forest spirits, the first time in history that we had actually seen these, that's recorded that these creatures had been involved in a conflict as summoned by elves. It's a seminal moment when those two races came together. So this would have actually been well before the intervention by Laurelorn, which, as we know from Warhammer history, would happen after the War of the Beard, when Carrack Norn would invade the Laurelorn, or the Fey Forest, and become involved in their conflict and protect those elves there, or rather, the forest would use the elves to protect themselves, depending on your interpretation of events. But yes, so that happened during the War of the Beard, and its events are depicted in that book series by Black Library. And as a result, Tor Lithanel was spared the destruction that had happened to literally every other colony besides Laurelorn in the Elven world. And the High King of the Dwarves actually noted that the army of Carrick Eightbeaks was completely destroyed and did not end up showing up for the 14th siege of Tor Leslie that ended that conflict, though we did not know why at the time. And the foundation of what we know as the forest of Laurelorn Forest and the culture there between the elves of that community and the forest spirits was laid from that battle. So that was about 2500 a negative 2500 imperial calendar. In today's world, Laurelorn Forest looks very similar to this. It's no longer just Tor Lithanel. The land is divided into what are called wards. Similar to the divisions in Laurelorn, where it's divided into the kindred areas there. But the wards are the kind of the neighborhoods, I guess you could say, where people, where the elves live. So you have the Ward of the Sun, which is where the capital city is located. You have the Ward of Rain over here. The Ward of Storm is where humans are allowed to be located, and that's important for if you're doing theming, especially if you're doing Warhammer roleplay theme, because that's where humans are allowed to hang out. So if you're theming as a human trader or even a dwarf trader, that would be where your your community is allowed to be. Now it seems like this community here is actually kind of in the Ward of the Sun, but I'm not sure if that's just kind of close by or if it's actually in it. But according to the theming from the Warhammer roleplay guide, Ward of the Storm is where your human communities are allowed to settle. As far as how the elves of Laurelorn Forest get along with humans, this is where they primarily differ. So the Eonir, as opposed to the Asrai, are much more cosmopolitan. They actually serve alongside humans in their court. The Count of Nordland has elves in his court. Boris Todbringer of Middenland of Middenheim has elves in his court as well, and they explore the world around them, both as traders, merchants, and entertainers, as well as warriors, because they're fully integrated. They're not as aloof and out of time as the forest of Laurelorn is. And part of that is because they existed before Laurelorn. They weren't the forest spirits of Laurelorn Forest who integrated the elves. They were the elves there, and then they allied with forest spirits there, or forest spirits became part of their culture. So they maintained a lot of that previous high elven culture and then really joined with forest spirits, as opposed to Laurelorn, where the elves there really embraced, or willingly or not, embraced that forest etherealness and that kind of almost demonic nature that came with their allyship with the tree spirits. And that reflects itself in the game, as in the roleplay game, as far as being, you'll see elves in all parts of society. You can have all sorts of careers with them, and you'll see them in all parts of in all walks of life. And you could reflect that if you were doing it as a Warhammer tabletop army through allyship rules. Maybe you'll include elves with a contingent of cities of Sigmar if you're doing this as an Age of Sigmar themed army, or if you're doing it as a Warhammer Fantasy Battles 8th edition, because that was a similar kind of system there. You could use elves alongside Empire armies, and that would Wood Elf units alongside Empire armies, and that would work out very well for them as well. As far as aesthetics are concerned, you'll notice that the city of Tor Lithanel is noted to be almost a preserved pre-War of the Beard elven city, dominated by its three towers in the same way that Tor Leslie was. Now, it's not as well populated as the elven cities of Ulthuan, largely because its population is very low. But, and this is not a picture of that city. We don't have any existing art. This is a rendering of an Ulthuan city by Total War Warhammer 3. But it's a pretty good example of elven architecture, as it would probably be closer than what we see in, say, Laurelorn. And since the architecture is well preserved, we do know that it is described as the City of Glass by the few humans that have visited because of the sheer magnificence of the city and the reflectiveness of the gems in the buildings. Now, the gems in the buildings are actually not just gems, nor are they just glass. They're actually the soul stones of the elves who have perished, and their souls have been encased in those gems so as to prevent them from being consumed by chaos, which, of course, just as in the 40K universe, lusts after elven souls because of the richness of their emotional vibrancy. So this is the site that would most likely be available to a traveler to the elven cities of the Eonir, versus Laurelorn, which, as we do know from existing interpretations and illustrations from Games Workshop, is trees, all day long trees. I imagine that if you're familiar with other kinds of fantasy depictions, it would be the difference between Rivendell and the Wood Elf cities of Middle-earth as well. Rivendell being, while not cosmopolitan like the White City, certainly not living in trees. Now, as far as aesthetics, though, there really aren't a lot of differences. The elves of Laurelorn Forest are modeled much the same way. You'll notice the same kind of armaments and accoutrements. I was expecting a little bit more difference here, but it seems like the art departments of both groups, Games Workshop and, of course, the Warhammer Roleplay Company, are both looking at the same kinds of inspirations, and that's perfectly fine. No complaints there. So you'd be looking at the same kinds of inspirations for your models, and there's so no real differences there. Being in the woods means dressing in furs and feathers and lots of greenery. And of course, these guys here on this side and this side are Eonir, and then this gentleman here in the center, or gentlewoman, is a noble of the Asrai. Both Wood Elf cultures, according to information that we have available to us, are gender equal. So you would have both male and female elves serving in all capacities of Asrai or Eonir society. And that actually brings us to one of the major distinctions, is their leadership. The elves of the Eonir are led by Queen Mariseth, which is a descendant of Morelian, the first Phoenix King, Anirian, and the first his Everqueen wife's first child, their son, and is not a magical creature per se, which makes her different from the other three monarchs of elven societies. But Cubicle 7 did choose to model her not so much on the Asrai leader, which, if you'll notice, Ariel, Queen of the Wood Elves, is very much a magical figure. She's a fairy, and she's the fairy queen, all day long fairy. Got wings, looks like a ghost, uses magic, all day long fairy. But when looking at her, and in the lore, she also is not a magical character. She does commune with the tree spirits, but that's more in a capacity of she rules an area where tree spirits live. And again, she's also communing with tree kin, which we're going to talk about later, but they aren't really, they're not really tree spirits in the same way that a tree man is. A tree kin is different. But she actually bears a stronger resemblance to Alariel, the Everqueen, which kind of makes sense, since her line, Queen Mariseth's line, is actually a descendant of the handmaidens of the Everqueen. So the guardians that follow Alariel around, rather than a matriarch or a queen in her own right. And just a little bit of the backstory of the government of the Eonir. Initially, like all of the elves of the Elith Arvan, which is the elven colonies of the Old World, they were governed by the colonial High Council. However, after the War of the Beard, the elven Phoenix King Caladriel, or Caradriel, sorry, ordered that all the elves come back to Ulthuan or no longer be defended by his armies because they had to deal with Malekith invading Ulthuan again. And the elves of Laurelorn politely said, "Bugger off, we're not coming with you." At that point, they changed their government from being a subsidiary, the 11th Kingdom of Ulthuan, to being a monarch in its own right. They upgraded themselves from being a council to a senate and gave themselves a matriarchal queen. Mariseth is the 4th queen in that line, and although she's only been queen for a few centuries, she has led them through the Great Invasion of Chaos, and also is planning for the next one coming up in her mind, though we already know, unfortunately, how the end times ends up. Sorry, Mariseth. All right. Now, the major difference, if you're going to be playing a Laurelorn Elves army, either in on the tabletop or if you're making a mod for them, is going to be your tree spirits. The elves of Laurelorn Forest have no truly ancient tree spirits. Athelloren is the heart of what was once the great forest of the Old Ones experiment that covered the whole of the Old World. The Laurelorn Forest is not, and its tree spirits are sustained on much weaker magic, and at this point in history, in the 2500s, they are weak. They're fading away. So your Dryads, which are the Lith, Core Choice, Battle Line tree units, and also your Tree Man, which are the heavy-duty, Lord-like, magic-using tree units, they are fading away, and they no longer exist in the same numbers that they once did. Treekin are different. Treekin are the spirits of elves who have once lived and who, rather than being able to let go, they bound their spirits into deadwood and continue to serve their queen and their community, as golems essentially. But they're still sustained by magic, and unfortunately, they too are fading away. The magic is leaving Laurelorn Forest. If you ask the Asrai, it's because the Eonir are not diligent enough in their persecution of outsiders. If you ask the Eonir, Queen Mariseth has already prophesied it's because chaos is coming, and it's destroying their world. Regardless of the reason, the Eonir, if you're going to field them on the tabletop or make a mod for them, you're going to include more mortal units and maybe even some outside units, Imperial units from the outside world, or even Dwarven units, because they're willing to fight for anybody for some beer. Because you're not going to have the tree unit support, the forest spirit support units that you once did. And if you do have forest units, I would maybe have more tree kin, because they're going to be more numerous than the other kinds of forest spirits. Similarly, it's well known that there are no forest dragons in Laurelorn Forest. The dragon rookery that is in their capital city is empty. It has been empty for some time, and they have not been able to fill it, even though their prince has put a bounty on getting a dragon to fill it up. So, no dragons there, unlike the Asrai of Athelloren. So that brings us to the end here. I hope you found this useful. I know I've had a great time researching it, and I hope you've had a good time listening to me. Please share this video with your friends. Click like and subscribe. We're almost at 200 views, which is amazing for me. I've never had anything that people wanted to look at 200 times, so this channel is a first for me. Thank you again for tuning in, and be safe out there, and good luck with your playing and your modding and your warhammering in general. Enjoy your hobby.